My name is Matt Myers. I'm Dean of the Cox School of Business, and it's my pleasure to welcome you all to the O'Neill Center Texas Economic Forum this evening. For those of you all who have never been on campus before, you're here at a great time. We've got all of our students basically trying to survive midterms. You can feel the energy and angst on campus as you walk through. It's a wonderful time to be on campus, not the least of which because we have won 2 football games in a row, including over Navy. It's my pleasure to be here tonight because the O'Neill Center, the work that the folks are doing in the center is something that I think is very timely today and in today's national discourse relative to things such as trade, economics, social policy, and economic policy. And I think you're very much going to enjoy this evening's presentation. In order to get things kicked off, it's my pleasure to introduce Louisa Del Rose, a colleague of ours here at SMU and one that we're very proud to work with. Louisa was born in Mexico and lived there until she moved to Dallas to attend Southern Methodist University. She holds dual bachelor's degrees in political science and sociology, as well as a master's degree in higher education policy and leadership. And if I may say so, we know she's extra smart because her husband's in one of our MBA programs here at the Cox School of Business. So we're very proud of that too. Currently, Louisa serves as Executive Director of the Tower Center for Political Studies, a public policy research and program center, and is the founding executive director of the Mission Foods Texas-Mexico Center, an action-oriented policy research center, both of those here at SMU. She's the youngest executive director at the university, as well as the only Hispanic to head up 2 of our centers. Previously, at SMU Cox School of Business, Louisa oversaw strategy for our new global partners to engage in leadership and business development for our Latino Leadership Initiative, another initiative we're very proud of here at the Cox School. Prior to SMU, Louisa was Community Relations Manager for Education is Freedom. She oversaw the development of community partnership and was responsible for the administration of Dallas Mayor Tom Lennert's Intern Fellows Program. I will also say on a personal note that I have traveled quite a bit with Louisa a couple of times down to Mexico and to El Paso. She's never once laughed at my Spanish, and she's always kept me out of trouble. So I'm very proud to be a colleague of Louisa's, and please join me in welcoming Louisa Del Rose. Louisa.
Thank you, Dean Myers, for the kind and at least longer introduction than I expected. I'm really proud to be a colleague of the Dean, really to work for him as our center. The Mission Foods Texas-Mexico Center is under the Dedman College of Humanities and Sciences, but in partnership with the Cox School. And Dean Myers sits on our board and has been, actions speak louder than words, and he just mentioned how he's willing to travel with us and take our research beyond the Metroplex and to the parts where we think we can influence policy. Our center, the Mission Foods Texas-Mexico Center, believes deeply in integration between Texas and Mexico. If our name doesn't give it away, then I don't know what else. But we believe that we are more successful. I tell my team all the time, if you want to go fast, you go alone. If you want to go far, you go together. And I don't think we could have found a better partner to go together and go further than the Cox School and the O'Neill Center. What the work that they do is action-oriented, is relevant, it's timely, and that's the type of research we want to focus on. So when we saw the opportunity to work with people like Michael Cox and Richard Alm and Meg and Bob and Dean and every partner at the O'Neill Center, we said, yes, sign us up. We already are fans of the Dean. He has traveled far and wide with us. So what a better way to take our research further and partnering on this report. So thank you all for the work you do. Alongside you, we will go very, very far and prove that we indeed are better together. And that's one of the logos, kind of the slogans of our center. So you're in for a treat as we learn from both Rich and Michael about this report, where Texas-Mexico has been, where can it be, and where our center, Texas-Mexico Center, hopes to push forward. And then these types of reports will hopefully inform policymakers on sound decisions that will bring the state and the country closer. And then we have a great friend, Tiffany from NASCO, who will tell you more about the industry perspective, where the research becomes action and where we see industries needing our help and our dialogue and our information in order for them to talk to policymakers. So Tiffany, thank you for willing to be here, provide your perspective. You have deep knowledge. You've been involved in NAFTA, now US, Mexico, Canada, and you've led us to great collaboration, so I can't wait to hear. So thank you for joining us as we go together towards greater integration between Texas and Mexico. I enjoy the program.
Louisa and Dean Myers, thank you. Thank you. Good evening. Great day to be on campus. Now with the rest of the program. I'm Kevin Knox, and I serve on Dean Myers' staff here. I direct the Alumni and External Relations Office at the Knox School. I think I'm probably not the oldest. I'm one of the oldest executive directors, you being one of the youngest. This is our 5th Texas Economic Forum. We started 2 years ago with one simple goal, and that was sharing research and information about the state's economy. Tonight, we're very proud to include Mission Foods Texas-Mexico Center as co-sponsor. Today's topic is very current and very relevant. Our speakers are going to discuss the expansion of business ties between Texas and Mexico over the past 25 years, and also talk about the risks we see from rising economic nationalism in both countries. Each speaker is going to have about 20 minutes, and when that 20 minutes is up, I'm going to call time out, and we'll move right into Q&A before the next speaker takes the floor. So turn off your cell phones. Restrooms are in the foyer. We'll have a reception after the last speaker and Q&A are over. And if you're not 21, you are invited not to have a beer. First speaker is my good friend Michael Cox. In 2008, Michael came to the Cox School after serving in the Dallas Federal Reserve Bank for 25 years. Michael was named as the founding director of the O'Neill Center, and then in 2015 he returned here at the Cox School at SMU to teaching and research. So this is going to be a bit of a duo with Michael and Rick Alm. Rick Alm worked for Michael at the Dallas Fed, and Michael quickly recruited him to come to SMU to serve on the O'Neill Center staff. A great team is always a great team, right? Right, Rick? The best. They have authored the essay on Texico, Texico, and in the O'Neill Center's annual report. And of course, they're responsible for that initiative. We have copies of that. If you didn't get it on the way in, you can get it on the way out. Their presentation is titled A Tour of Texico, Two Growing Economies Growing Together. So Rick, you're going to be our leadoff hitter, is that right? And then Michael, you're on deck. So please welcome Rick and Michael.
Thank you, Kevin. I just want to start, both of the presentations today have something to do with economic integration. So I want to start with just a few bullet points on what that actually means. As a definition, it's the ability to exchange goods, services, money, and ideas across borders. It's helped by geographical proximity, transportation links, information ties, and other things that allow economies to connect. It's an organic process driven by the private sector, the result of millions of individual decisions. It requires markets and economic freedom. When economic integration has been state-driven, it's ended up as colonialism. The benefits of integration are gains from specialization in trade, more efficient allocation of scarce resources, improved global competitiveness, higher consumer welfare, transfers of technology and know-how, and peace, i.e. lower chances of war. The downside, it unleashes destructive market forces. Integration doesn't get started in earnest until the economics and policy are both right. On the economic side, each partner must offer something the other values: labor, capital, raw materials, technology, potential customers, any of these in combination. On the policy side, economy must be open enough to give the private sector the room it needs to capitalize on available business opportunities. It took a long time for Texas and Mexico to get it right. And that's what I'm going to try to talk to you about right now. Now, going back here, Texas was part of Mexico, if you'll remember from your history. couldn't integrate much, even though we were part of the same country, because of the distance and the transport technology didn't, you couldn't communicate or send goods from San Antonio and down to Mexico City. And during most of the 1800s, Mexico had a non-tradable subsistence farming hacienda economy that didn't produce anything that was really worth trade, really ripe for trading. And then at this time, Texas was connecting northward with cotton and cattle and railroads and trying to feed the emerging industrial economy of the United States. Now, and at the very end of it, we had Porfirio Diaz did try to open the economy for about 3 decades and had some success, but another factor was the high tariff walls. So nothing really was right until then, and Texas's oil economy Texas was dominated by oil, and the Mexican Miracle took place. So they were kind of happy in their inward-looking substitution policies, but when oil bust happened in the early 80s, both Texas and Mexico both got a rude awakening, and Texas reacted by diversifying its economy through the market system, and Mexico reacted by throwing their economy open to foreign competition. So what we see is that what Mike and I decided is that actually this integration of Mexico happened sometime in the decade between the early 80s and the early 90s, and so this effort is relatively young. And so with that, Mike Cox.
Rick really knows the history, and if you could just sit with him for an hour, just learn so much about Texas slave days and everything. All right, so I'm going to focus mainly on the data, and I'm going to start with the United States because going back very far, there's not much data on Texas and Mexico, just U.S. and Mexico. And so what I say here is that we are really only recently becoming economically close, Mexico and the United States. You can see that right here in terms of U.S.-Mexico goods trade, merchandise trade goes back, we get the data 1869. This is as a share of U.S. GDP, not even 0.5% for 150, nearly 180 years until finally trade started to take off, and today is 3% of U.S. GDP, merchandise trade. If you add to that the services trade, we're up above 3%, but you can see it's really not services trade that's been growing, it's the continuing growth of merchandise trade, but that's where the boom kind of starts in trade. If we look at U.S. direct investment in Mexico and vice versa, blue being us to Mexico, we see that that was also very low for a long, long time, about 0.1% of GDP. And only recently did we start investing in each other's countries, mainly America first in Mexico, but now Mexico increasingly in the United States. So that boom also was recent. If you look at U.S. multinational sales abroad in Mexico, that also didn't really start until the 50s. We have a lot of multinationals in Mexico now. You could probably name 100 of them. And that's the source of a lot of revenue back to America. So that's revenue coming from our sales over there. But if we look at immigration, this is United States immigration, wherever it comes from, decade by decade. Persons obtaining lawful permanent residence in the United States. The navy blue there on top is coming from Mexico. So you won't see much of that at all until the latter half of this, well, of the 20th century, okay? You see the big booms came back there. Most of people coming from elsewhere. So we weren't very integrated as nations. let's focus now on Texico, the combination of Mexico and Texas. And what I would say about this is definitely, for the relatively few numbers, a number of years we've been working together, we're off to a great start. This is Texas manufacturing exports to Mexico as compared to the rest of the world. Our exports since 1988, goods exports have increased 725%. To the rest of the world, 350%. So that's double to Mexico than to the rest of the world. So we're off to a good start in terms of exports. In fact, if you look at trade amongst each one of the states in America with Texas, export and import trade, and trade with each one of the countries in America, and the same thing for Texas, what you're going to find is that Texas is Mexico's #1 import and export partner, and vice versa, regardless of whether it's a state or a country. We're it for each other, okay? The countries here are in kind of a blue, and the states are in black. And you see we're on top. Both Texas and Mexico are always on top on these lists. Now, and this graph kind of shows you how much of an outlier Texas is in terms of its trade with Mexico as compared to other states. We export our trade, exports and imports are $188 billion last year. Trade with Mexico, exports and imports to Texas back and forth, $188 billion, by far the most. California's not even half of what we do, and as a share, we're 11.1%. The reason Michigan is higher is simply because a lot of stuff goes back and forth between Detroit and some of the auto assembly plants in Mexico. It's in a supply chain, okay? All right, now immigration. Well, this is Mexican immigration by decade to Texas. Nothing really happened until recently, when we had a relatively large, relative to the past, influx of Mexicans into Texas. So that's been feeding our economy. In fact, Texas has the second greatest share of employees in their state who come from Mexico. California being #1 here, 12% of our employees come from Mexico. Now let's focus on the two parts of Mexico and Texas, and I'll try to summarize this for you. It's a lot of words here. Mexico's land mass is 3 times that of Texas. Population is 5 times as large. They're younger, and let's see, they also have substantially less schooling, sadly, especially a lot fewer graduate or professional degrees. Mexicans work long hours, have a shorter work week, produce far less GDP per capita. Texas has about 40% of the Texico GDP, but our GDP per capita is 3 times that of Mexico, and roughly the same fraction of multiple of hourly wages. And if you look at the growth in GDP per employed person over the 1990 to 2017 period, in Texas, it just sadly blows away Mexico. 73.6% growth in our GDP per employed person over that time period compared to 5.4% for Mexico. Texas now outproduces Mexico in oil, and our manufacturing output has been growing faster. We work much more in services. Our wealth is about 9 times, our mean net wealth per person is 9 times that of a person in Mexico. We live in much larger houses and have more of all the things you can possibly imagine. And I'll come back and show you that later. What this graph shows you is that, so Texas supplies about 20% of the work hours inside Texico, 20% of the work hours. But with that, we produce over 20% of the output in every economic sector except agriculture. Part of that is, what?
Over 42%.
Yeah, that's on average, on 42% of overall GDP. But in every sector, we produce more than 20% of the output, even though we have 20% of the hours. Now, part of that is, of course, just the choice of where to work and what sector. But the other thing is how much more productive your typical Texan is than a Mexican in the job market. So that's one thing this graph shows you. But what else does it show you? We'll look at the bottom. Agriculture, transportation, retail, trade, construction, manufacturing is at the bottom. That's where Mexico has its relative advantage. And at the top, United States has its relative advantage. I mean, Texas does in things involving education, such as professional and scientific services, healthcare, business management. We know mining is that's oil sector, information, arts, entertainment, finance, and insurance. In fact, another thing this says is that, and it comes to no surprise, but the data here confirm it, that Mexico's economy is still largely oriented toward the industrial and even the agrarian age, whereas we've moved on to the industrial age. And in our last report, Rick and I argued America has moved into the imagination age, even leaving the information age behind. So still kind of stuck in the economies of the past. Mexico's convergence has been really slow and very disappointing. Usually when a country opens up, such as Canada did here, such as China did, you'll see their per capita income soar. It happened in South Korea when they joined the global capitalist club. Chile got more economic freedom, saw their incomes rise. Wonderfully, it was happening to Mexico for a while, and then it just died. That convergence almost died. GDP per employed person in Texas has grown from about $60,000 per person to nearly $100,000, but whereas in Mexico it's barely moved at all. There's no convergence there. And thanks to the government-run Pemex, government ownership Pemex, and the inefficiencies there, Mexico's oil production has dropped off, whereas Texas has soared. And we're now way above them in oil terms, oil production. If you look at how far Mexico is behind in terms of household ownership of durable goods, this is the gap. Okay, so this is them minus us. So if we're ahead of them, it's a negative value, and of course we're ahead of them. They're finally catching up in such things as electricity and color TVs, complete indoor plumbing, still way behind America, washing machines and refrigerators, but slipping further behind in terms of air conditioning. I'm not worried about that one too much because it's awfully nice up in the mountains of Mexico. And it's not, their climate is much better than ours. Automobile ownership starting to rise, but many things, mobile phones, we know what that's about. Carlos Slim getting rich, and what do you think he's doing with the money? Giving it to the politicians for his monopoly. So they're way behind on a lot of things and only recently catching up, and still surprisingly slowly. So what is holding Mexico back? Well, I'm going to point to 3 or 4 things depending on how you count them. The first thing is economic freedom. China's seen a rise in economic freedom, so has Chile and South Korea. And Mexico has at the national government level, but at the all government level, which includes the local governments, it started to fall. So there's been a big gap developing between economic freedom at the all government level and the national level. That is what's, the loss in freedom going on in the towns and states. And it's coming, of course, from more corruption. A lot of things, but more corruption. The place called Transparency International produces corruption perception index, and U.S. is not quite as high as it used to be in terms of corruption, but it's still in the same range of 70 to 80. But Mexico recently has gone nowhere, and then recently has started to fall in terms of their corruption perceptions index. And there's an article in the paper about this today. We're looking at what has happened at the local level versus the national level in Mexico. In 1968, students struggled against a monolithic government that presided over the booming economy. That's the big federal government. Today, the situation is much more chaotic with the government that's barely in control of many aspects of society, battered by violent drug cartels that are often supported by rogue cops, that's local, and by mayors, that's local. I want y'all to watch the movie La Ley de Herodes. You'll enjoy it. Great movie. So, and look at the homicide rate in the Americas. Amongst the top 20 countries with the highest homicide rates globally, out of 230 countries measured, 8 of the worst are in the Americas, and 9 of those 20 are in the Caribbean. Mexico ranks 20th from the top. They're in that top 20, sadly. United States is 90th. Canada is 158th. Now, that's horrible, and it makes Mexico look like it's not so bad, but it's still, it's not the kind of thing a modern society can tolerate and can be successful with. And what has happened with the crime rate in Mexico, of course, has jumped up. Starting around, shortly after the mid-2000s, the mid-aughts, the United States has continued to fall. Canada's about flat, very low. And Mexico is having great success in lowering its crime rate until you know what. And if you think this has something to do with Colombia trying to get rid of their drug cartels, and it absolutely does. In fact, now that I bring in, this slide brings in other countries such as Venezuela and Colombia. And you can see here comes Colombia down in red. And as Colombia is falling, we get to a point, Guatemala peaks, and it's like the drug cartel said, okay, let's just get close to the United States. And that's where the crime is now. And it's very difficult for a nation to succeed with this heavy burden on trade. I mean, I stopped going to Mexico except for this recent trip because I'm afraid to just go out into the countryside like I used to. I used to travel into the countryside routinely. And if you go back to that chart I showed you on the different sectors, there would be a lot of highly educated Americans who would on a regular basis be going back and forth having a dual lifestyle in Mexico and Texas if they felt more comfortable doing that. And another thing that's holding Mexico back, of course, is mean years of schooling. In 1950, mean years of schooling in Mexico were 2.2. That's 2.2 years of schooling. It's jumped by 6.2 years, which is the 4th biggest jump here over that time period. And now Mexico has gone from ranking 11th amongst these American nations, nations of the Americas, Latin America, and the United States and Canada, but Canada's not in here. But we've gone from 11th. Mexico has gone from 11th to 7th, which is good, and it's a great improvement, but Mexico still has a long way to go to have the kind of schooling for their labor force that makes a modern society successful. So I don't want to end on a negative note. I want to point out, of course, that this is sad, and we would love it if things would get better. And I want to go back and focus on what this wonderful place is that I've lived. I've lived here for 34 years. I don't like the climate. I don't like the terrain. Mexico's got it all over us in terms of the climate and the mountains and the lifestyles to a certain degree, right? What is it that makes this barren place that wasn't even settled when Mexico had a part of it? They wouldn't even want to live up here. Why are we doing so much better here? It comes down to economic freedom and all these things I've pointed out, which we need to extricate Mexico from. Because Texico, this wonderful, Rick won't let me use the word Shangri-La land, this wonderful place we live in, it's fantastic. And I do love living here, despite all the fact there's no mountains, there's no beach, the weather, and all that. I love living here. And it's because of the business climate. And you know what? Just a little bit more, and we're going to pass up Germany. We are the 6th largest economy in the world. That's how much is going on here. It's very dynamic and improving, and I hope it continues. And I want to say, if you don't think we in DFW welcome Mexicans, check this out. This is DFW's foreign-born population and where they come from. Okay? Shana here, a friend of mine, Shana, had an argument with some folks the other day about, well, you're not even accepting Mexicans into your city. And I said, Shana, send them this graph that I just came up with. And here's my wife's hometown, home Ecuador, right? So, and there's Mexico. But this is little bitty old Scotland down here on this bottom row. I mean, we love it when they come here, and we welcome Mexicans with open arms. Let me stop right here. Okay, I got to go to class. Oh, do I have time? I think good. All right. Let me go back to that graph because that's an awesome graph. I don't know if everybody likes this. You can go look and see where your ancestors are from. You gonna let me go easy? Questions? Yes, Jim.
You remember the debate between Al Gore and Ross Perot?
The sucking sound debate?
Perot said anybody with a nickel's worth of common sense could see all the jobs are going to Mexico. Could you explain to us why that didn't happen?
Anybody with a nickel's worth of common sense would see that all the jobs are going to Mexico. Why didn't that happen? Well, it's how many reasons should I give? And what he was talking about there, the fact that labor was cheaper in Mexico than in America, and so all the jobs would go there. But look, let me make it even more extreme. In China, a typical worker in the fields makes about 50 cents an hour, but in our agrarian industry, they make about $30 an hour. How can we sustain that wage differential? Are we going to all be working at coolie wages, which is another one of these kind of sayings? The answer is that's a ratio of 30 to 0.5, that's 60. The answer is we're more than 60 times as productive. And so wages can stay high here because the productivity is high here. And Americans can keep jobs here because they're productive. In fact, in this recent USMC, sounds like U.S. Marine Corps with an A at the end of it, USMCA agreement, American workers guaranteed that they would keep high wages. And while giving Mexico, I think it was $16 an hour, and was that the net figure that they were negotiated for in that new, I'm going to call it NAFTA too. It's so much better than the other name. So that's how productivity amongst American workers remains very high. Yes, I'm sorry.
I'm going to McAllen tomorrow. I went to McAllen a month ago, and I got an education from a new client. He said, McAllen is 1 million people. 300,000 of those people are illegal immigrants. Mm-hmm. He said, I pay my workers $12 to $14 an hour. My competitors pay their illegal immigrants $6 to $8 an hour. And I guess that was pretty shocking, but then my question is, so what the hell do we do about this?
Well, this is what
They are not illegal, they are undocumented.
Yeah, I'm glad you said that. All right, so in fact, I was in McAllen recently, giving a speech on something like this, and a woman, I had lunch with a woman there, and she pointed that out, and I think it's a really good point. If you think about the further you get away from the border, what happens, right? The further you get away from the border, the more you get to where you go away on the border, the labor supply curve is like this. This is from my economics students back here. It's flat, right? It's flat. At what wage? The minimum wage, or maybe a little below that. Why is it flat? Because in Mexico, the wage is much lower, and so people can come across the border, and they're happy to come across the border and keep coming across the border at that wage. All right. Now, and so she was saying even the Mexican immigrants who came here 20, 30 years ago are still having pressure from those wages. And the answer is just, well, then move. Move to a different part of America, Move somewhere where the labor supply curve starts to have some upward slope to it. And that's what people do. And so that's the answer to the question. Yes, sir.
In the Governor Abbott in the Governor Abbott and Lupe Valdez debate, she commented that some of the safest cities in Texas were the border cities: El Paso, McAllen, Brownsville. Mm-hmm. Does that agree with what you've seen?
Yeah, Yeah, you know, so my wife sells insurance. She's from Ecuador, and she came here and is an immigrant, and now her business is selling insurance to mainly illegals, right? Sorry, not illegals, undocumented residents. What's the exact undocumented residents? The best term for that, the acceptable term, because I want to use the acceptable term. And so if you look at her accident rates for her policyholders, they're far below that in the general population, right? Because if you're here and you want to come to America and make a better life for yourself and your family, just like everybody else who ever came here wants to do, no different, you know, then you're much less likely to commit crime. In fact, there was an article recently that I read about the crime rates amongst undocumented residents are lower than the general population. You're much less likely to get involved in an accident. You're going to be careful. You don't want to be deported. And not only that, if you get in an accident, you're probably even going to settle it in cash, so you don't have to make an insurance claim or have anybody come and report, you know, the police come and report the accident. So, I mean, these folks are very careful and they're very respectful on average. And I'm not saying that's true of every person, but it's not true of every American who was born here either, far from it, right? So, yes, sir.
You mentioned NAFTA too. Is it going to change things, or what do we expect?
It's still so much that has to, yeah, it's going to change things. And some people think it's a better agreement even than NAFTA. And I think it kind of depends on the industry you're in, right? I hope that we undid a lot of what NAFTA had done from Mexico's standpoint on telecom, because they didn't let telecom in very much. Do you know how that turned out, Louisa?
It's positive for that industry.
So there's a lot of things that I have to get into the details, and I haven't really got into the details yet. But my overall impression, it's going to be at least as positive as NAFTA 1. Yes, sir.
Regarding corruption, do you see any data to support that the national government of Mexico is taking any steps towards reducing the corruption at the local level? And if they're not, what could they be doing?
You know, this is really, I mean, this is a huge problem that's going to require a total commitment and a lot of money spent to expunge the narco groups from Mexico. The problem is they're getting deep-seated because they'll go into a town and they'll fund a lot of things, and they're very generous, and they open hospitals. They learned from Pablo Escobar how you ingratiate yourself to the local communities, and they sometimes they're looked upon favorably by the local communities. So I don't know. I'm not an expert on this, and I would invite you to find somebody who is before I attempt to give a question to something I really am not an expert on.
Do you see any net value, though, in perhaps using American dollars to help solve the problem?
Absolutely.
That in the overall situation would improve the economy of...
I can think of 3 trillion things that this government spends money on, which are not as good an investment as that. Okay? Absolutely. Stop spending on so many other things and spend on something that helps our neighbor to the south build infrastructure, get rid of the crime, everything. And it's an investment in North America and in America per se. Absolutely. We did some of that just to try to clean up, you know, the drugs cartels in Colombia. We need to do it in Mexico, and this is going to require a major effort, but it has to be done. Mexico won't make much progress at all until this gets done. Education will help from within to get people to rally up against it, but it's going to require a lot of, I think it's going to require a 100% concerted effort. I got to go. Yes, for Jay?
Dovetailing with that, China's been kind of plowing through Africa with that kind of investment.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Are they doing the same in Mexico, or are they going to need us with a bunch?
Not that I know. Is China and Mexico doing this kind of stuff, investing and trying to improve? Well, that's good. I mean, it's good for Mexico. That's good. All right, ladies, I have to go teach my class. And gentlemen, see ya. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you, Rick. On with the program, right? Even though he's got to go, teach these young minds. Our next speaker, Tiffany Melvin. She was the original executive director of the North American Strategy for Competitiveness, NASCO for short. 3 years ago, Tiffany became NASCO's president. NASCO is a widely respected tri-national coalition focusing on freight logistics, energy and the environment, and skilled workforce certificate programs. I think she was quoted as saying she helps the trains run on time. Is that right? That's what I heard. A graduate of the University of Texas at Austin, she also has a law degree from St. Mary's University in San Antonio. Her presentation is titled, Blurring the Boundaries, Why Integration Matters. Please help me welcome Tiffany Melvin. Tiffany? The floor is yours.
Thank you so much. Thanks to the Mission Foods Texas Mexico Center and the Cox School of Business for having me here. It's a little bit of a new crowd. I think I'm seeing a lot of new faces out there. I actually have a couple of comments on some of the last questions, but I'll perhaps talk a little bit about what I do and what my organization does so that you have some perspective on sort of where I'm coming from in all this discussion. As was mentioned, well, it wasn't mentioned, NASCO started off here in the North Central Texas area as the I-35 Corridor Coalition in 1994, right when the first NAFTA was enacted. And so a few of the local governments and a few industry businesses from different industries got together to say, okay, there was already so much North American truck traffic on I-35 before NAFTA came along. People tend to forget that there was North American trade before NAFTA. It was already very congested in I-35, and they were thinking, okay, this new NAFTA thing, whether it's good, bad, or ugly, we need to band together to figure out a way to lobby Congress to get infrastructure funds to expand our capacity so that we don't have a massive congestion nightmare here in the North Texas area. So that was the original impetus behind that, the organization that I now run. Was really about NAFTA and how to make an opportunity into a great opportunity for the citizens of North Texas. The idea behind that, I mean, transportation, freight movement is the backbone of every nation's economy. So very slowly and very organically, other counties and industries that were not in the North Central Texas area started hearing about what we were doing. I joined the organization early '95 when I got out of law school. And so it grew and grew and grew, and grew quickly, not to just be I-35 and trucking and highway capacity, but more modes of transportation. There was a lot of interest to expand. So I won't bore you with the dramatic details of the 24 years, or 25 almost now, of our growth, but we grew very, very organically. And as we stand today, we are the only tri-national membership-based organization, volunteer membership-based organization that exists, that focuses on our North American supply chain and logistics, our energy and environmental opportunities, and closing our skilled workforce gap. And if you think about it, we've grown very organically into those three focus areas, and also, of course, the relationship building that goes along with having integrated societies and respect and friendship and truly love. It sounds corny, but we need a lot of that these days. So our three focus areas really are very fundamental to integration. And our continent, as is the Texico area, is already very integrated. But so our membership comes from all over North America. We have provinces in Canada, states in the U.S., states in Mexico. So we've got the state and provincial governments. We have cities and counties. We have economic development organizations, chambers of commerce, corridor coalitions from east and west coast, from all over the place. We have industry associations. We have global corporations on down to mom and pop shops, everything in between, small and medium, tiny, tiny companies to big, huge companies. We have educational institutions. We have high school independent school districts, we have community colleges, we have technical schools, we have colleges and graduate schools. So we have got this vast, diverse network of North Americans that really care about doing business with one another, meeting one another, expanding business opportunities, working at the federal government policy level, working at the local government policy level. So underneath each of our three focus areas that I mentioned, supply chain and logistics, energy and the environment, and closing the skilled workforce gap, we have a lot of different things that we do. So we're obviously advocates at all levels of government for those issues and to help bring attention to them and the need for more of them and more opportunities for federal policymakers to provide more opportunities and or funding to local communities to help with those things. But then we also try to go into, at the grassroots level, and really help educate people about the importance of an integrated North America, of free trade agreements, to help them understand that everything that you touch, see, eat, smell, use all day long got there on a truck, a train, a ship, or a plane. The costs of goods in the marketplace are directly related to transportation and logistics costs, to fuel costs, and to insurance premiums. And so when you talk about economies of scale or the importance of integration at a continental level, and it deals with a lot of the labor rates, but we're competing against the world. The idea is that North America should be the most competitive market on the globe, not competing with one another, but how do we do things together to make ourselves and our citizens and our countries prosper? I think a lot of people get hung up on the integration, and they think that it's not about, that they worry that it means erosion of national sovereignty. Not at all. You can be 3 independent countries that have integrated supply chains, integrated economies. It doesn't mean that you're losing, your dollars and your pesos and anything like that. It's not like you can have the model of the European Union, but the idea here in North America is that we're already integrated. We already make things together. Our supply chains are already so deeply rooted. I mean, the car that I drive a Jeep. It crosses the border, Canada-US, US-Mexico border, 8 to 12 times, depending on what model of car and that kind of a thing. So much of the stuff that we do in our continent is already so deeply integrated, and there's opportunity for more. Like I mentioned, so we've been going at this for 24 years. We were loving North America when loving North America wasn't cool, like the country song, right? So we would go out and try to help people understand, the importance of Mexico. There's a lot of misunderstandings about Mexico. Some of it is valid, some of it is not. There's a lot of perception issues there. I mean, Mexicans are very innovative. They have a young population that is getting more and more educated every day. They are rich and powerful and smart, and they don't drive themselves. They sit in the back of the cars and they work and they work and they work nonstop. I mean, so there's a lot of the people that are away. Here in Texas, we don't have a problem. We understand and value Mexicans. But when you get to the Midwest and some of these countries that have hated NAFTA for reasons they don't even understand why, a lot of that is deeply tied to immigration issues, illegal immigration, and because some of them may not have ever met a Mexican that wasn't their janitor or their maid. And so when you think about doing business with Mexico, you think we don't need them. But we do. We need Mexico. We're neighbors with Mexico. When Trump was elected, and the whole NAFTA kind of attack on NAFTA's the worst trade deal we've ever seen, all that started. It's been really interesting to see how that affects people. And so, I'm going to jump around a little bit here because I don't have notes and I'm just kind of talking off the top of my head. I've been in Vancouver all last week, and then we have the new USMCA agreement that just came out, and I haven't even had a chance to dive in, but I did bring some boiled down points that I want to share with you guys so that you're kind of in the know on the cutting edge USMCA. But in his very own speech 2 days ago on Monday morning, I guess, he was talking about how NAFTA's the worst trade deal, NAFTA's the worst trade deal. He goes on and on and on, and I've fixed it, and I've saved everything, and now we have this new USMCA, and the USMCA is going to govern over $1.3 trillion of trade with our continent. And I wanted to scream, how do you think that $1.3 trillion got there? NAFTA, right? Like NAFTA has resulted in this amazing trading relationship. So even Trump himself admits it while taking a win for destroying the old one. It's been interesting to see. I was also surprised we have all our industry members, right? We've got global corporations down to small mom and pop shops. So when this NAFTA thing started, we sent out a kind of a public service, not an announcement really, like oh my God, look, NAFTA's being attacked. They're going to renegotiate NAFTA. What do you guys want to see in the newly negotiated NAFTA? What are your top concerns? What are your priorities? Give us your specifics. Like, we need down and dirty details about statistics or what you need in an agreement to make your business be able to do business better. And we almost got crickets, right? We got a lot of responses saying, you must preserve the vision of North America to be the most competitive continent on earth. And they were high-level vision, and I was like, no, that's great. We get that. We love that. That's what we're all about. But what details, like what do you want in the trade agreement? And what I noticed, and what I've learned from other organizations, because we work with lots of bilateral organizations, US, Canada, US, Mexico. We just happen to have a trilateral scope. But a lot of companies, you'd be really surprised, didn't know what they wanted in a new NAFTA. And they were hoping someone else might have that answer. And I also learned that NAFTA was fairly underutilized because it's complicated to get a NAFTA certificate to actually do business using NAFTA. NAFTA's a platform, right? So you already have the World Trade Organization customs and duties and tariffs that are very, very low. So for some of the smaller and medium-sized companies that were faced with a lot of red tape to get their NAFTA certificate, it would almost cost more to hire someone that would understand how to get them and keep them updated with their NAFTA certificate than it is to just pay the duties. So global corporations that have a lot of money and have staff dedicated to that took advantage of that, and those are companies that employ a ton of people, and those are companies that have very integrated supply chains already. And by the way, they would say no matter what happens with NAFTA, because the threat to withdraw was very real, very, very real. And they said, you know what, if we do withdraw, we're still going to be doing business in North America. It's not like these integrated supply chains we're going to pick up and move, because they're too integrated. And so it was really interesting because I thought we were going to get all this information about NAFTA and what to do, and we were really kind of left with not that much. Now you have the trade policy gurus, you have the think tanks, and then you have the trade negotiators that are very, very knowledgeable, and all three countries had very, very good trade negotiating teams. Bouncing around a little bit, but so NAFTA has been this huge success. The issue about the jobs being lost to Mexico and the sucking sound earlier, that really, jobs weren't, I think that the most recent statistic is that there were about, really, and this may shock you guys, like about 300,000 jobs that were actually picked up and moved to Mexico. And 14 million jobs rely on North American trade. Most of the jobs that were lost, NAFTA is like, I call it the piñata, right? It gets blamed for everything. But the loss in jobs is really due to advances in manufacturing and technology innovation, robotics, being able to do more with a machine than you can with people. And that happened to be timed right with the whole NAFTA agreement. So a lot of people thought that was the cause of it, but not at all. But then no one ever talks about the job retention. At that same time, China was kind of a rising force, and a lot of companies were looking at the corporate tax rate and all the money it takes to do business in the United States. It may just be cheaper to go and pick up everything and move it to China, the whole corporation, and over to China. But when NAFTA came along, it helped companies think, you know what, I should stay here and give this a try. I'm going to stay in the U.S., I'll open some operations in Mexico, some in Canada. It will save me money. It allows me to keep my operations in the U.S. open instead of picking the whole thing up and going to China. So those job retention numbers are pretty significant. And then the other thing was that a lot of companies, when you go to them for statistics, how did NAFTA, give me the stats on how did NAFTA improve your business? Talk about your increased revenue as a direct result to NAFTA. I think a lot of companies took it for granted. They haven't really tracked that. You can ask the heads of the companies or the heads of their logistics divisions, and they'll say, no, absolutely NAFTA benefited our company. We may not even be around today if we hadn't had NAFTA. Like, it has been a huge help to us. We love it, we love it, we've got to keep it, we've got to preserve it, we've got to move it forward. But they have no proof, really. They have no stats or anything like that. And so a big message to all of us, for all of you that are in industry and everything, is we can't take this new USMCA thing for granted. We can't even take it for granted yet because it's not through Congress. But as we move forward as a continent and as an integrated continent, we've got to make sure that we track the success of these things, because now we're going to have a review every 6 years and an automatic termination every 16 if we don't renew it for 16 years at each of the 6-year options, if that makes any sense. Also, NAFTA, yeah, so NAFTA became, what I've also learned is that it's a piece of paper, it's a platform to do business. You can choose to use it or not, depending on your ability to meet the certificate requirements. But it became more than just a platform or an integration tool. It became a feeling. So NAFTA inspires feelings and emotions with people, either good or bad. And so you see President Trump, and there are a lot of things about, I mean, I'm not here to talk about Trump one way or another, but for NAFTA, he was able to tap into that emotional hatred for NAFTA from people that know an uncle or an aunt or a sister or brother or mother or father or themselves that lost a job due to NAFTA, even though that probably was not actually the case, but they blame it on that. And then you have people that love it because they know the benefits. And the closer into the center of the United States you get, the further away that love is. You have most people love it in the border states, they get it. But when you get into the interior, not as much. However, there are some cities that are very internationally minded, like Kansas City, and I mean, you've got a lot of urban centers that are very trade focused, but it's just those rural areas. What was also interesting is that a lot of the farming communities were the ones that hated NAFTA so much. Not so much anymore, right? So what the farmers didn't know is that their goods they were selling, they would sell to intermediaries like Cargill. So that was fine. They were selling their crops to Cargill. What they didn't know was that Cargill was turning around and selling them to Mexico. So technically those farmers' livelihoods were entirely dependent on trade with Mexico and or Canada, but they didn't know it. So then when everyone started, when everyone came out of the woodwork, industry associations, NASCO, Texas, Mexico, all the people that know what they're really truly talking about with this and have the trade policy understanding, the statistical understanding, the industry understanding, would talk about what's going to happen to you farmers if we withdraw from NAFTA. That's when you saw the agricultural community, and that seriously pretty much saved NAFTA with Trump. They came out of the woodwork, all the farming associations, all the farmers saying, no, you've got to keep it, you've got to keep it, we've got to maintain it. So meanwhile, when you talk about withdrawing from NAFTA or renegotiating it, there's a lot of stuff that needed to happen to it. It wasn't a perfect document originally, and in the past 25 years, there have been so many advancements, like you have e-commerce and digital trade, you have the telecom, you've got energy reforms in Mexico. I mean, there's all a slew of things, customs and trade facilitation, the technologies you use at the border, the technology you use to track freight as it's moving, all that didn't exist back then. So there was a real desperate, important need to modernize NAFTA. And that was the word that everyone that was kind of in the know about this stuff was saying: modernize it, amend it, don't end it, do it quickly. So I guess I'm trying to think what time it is. Okay, yeah, woo. I kind of jotted some notes. So basically what I think perhaps what I think might be most interesting is this USMCA agreement that just now we know we have an agreement between the three countries. We were so close to not having agreement with the three countries. So we should all be super happy that the three countries agreed to something. Some people consider it a NAFTA 0.8, meaning that it's not a NAFTA 2.0 because that suggests progress, that it's this fantastic new agreement. Some people say, my God, it's worse than the first one. It is modernized, which is good, but for some industries, they may not be quite as happy with it. But to have a trilateral agreement, and actually in the end, the US did give some concessions and Canada gave some concessions. Everyone conceded a bit and everyone got a little bit of what they wanted, which what I learned in law school, that's when you have a good negotiation, is when nobody's happy. That's when you know you've done a good job, right? So everyone did, I mean, in the 11th hour, like I'm not kidding, like 10:30 p.m. and at midnight, it was going to be too late to get this through. They came to an agreement. They've named it, Trump has named it the United States-Mexico-Canada Agreement. And you just heard from our previous speaker that a lot of people were like, how am I ever going to remember that? It was NAFTA was so much better. So I figured it out today. I heard this. I can't take credit for it. I wish I could. But everyone knows the song YMCA, right? So this is the USMCA. It's the easiest way to remember it. Just tack USMCA on there, and that's the name of it. But it has to go through Congress, so we can't have a giant celebration yet. Through the Trade Promotion Authority, which is a bunch of deadlines that the federal administration has got to meet to get things through Congress and give them enough time to review. The big reason for the delay was that, or the need for an agreement was that on Monday, October 1st, actually at midnight on September 30th, they had to have the text of the agreement published publicly and to Congress so they could start reviewing for 60 days. And with the rate that we're going, they will not get, with all the other deadlines that have to be met by the International Trade Commission and all this kind of stuff, there's no way that this current Congress is going to get to vote on it. So it is going to go to the next Congress, probably a vote in the spring of 2019. And it is dicey. The first NAFTA was hard to pass. This one is even going to be harder. Everyone got a little bit, but everyone gave a little bit. And so you're going to have the districts divided up by, well, my farmers got this, but my people over here didn't get this. And so it's going to be, and then you have the divided Congress already. And then you have Democrats that are not going to want to give anything to Trump, but they don't want to not have a USMCA because it's important to have the trilateral agreement. So you're going to have so many conflicting emotions and inner conflict of legislators. Do I do this for my district or do it for the country kind of things? It's going to be really interesting, and we're going to need everyone's help. If you have a leg in the game at NAFTA, which I assume you do because you're here, you need to be calling your members of Congress and telling them this is important to pass the USMCA. A few highlights. Let's see. Agriculture. Let me see if there's anything that just jumps out. Well, you heard a lot. So the autos, the rules of origin on autos, that was a huge one that was in the news a ton. And what they've done, and this goes to a little bit of the labor laws and everything, but they'd increased the NAFTA value of regional content for cars from 62.5% to 75%. The stronger content requirements are for core car parts like engines and transmissions. 70% of the cars have to be North American steel and aluminum. Okay, and this is, really NAFTA was designed, and USMCA, to get China out of the picture, because a lot of the U.S. companies complain that Mexico and Canada have agreements with China. They let their goods come in, they drill a hole in it, and then call it Mexican or Canadian and make it North American content when really it's coming from China. So a lot of this is all based on keeping China in a box, if that can even be done. But the new thing is this new labor value. And that's a provision, the value content provision, that requires that 40 to 45% of a car producer's activities, like cost of manufacturing, assembly, research and development, and information technology, have to be carried out by workers who earn at least $16 an hour. It's a huge win for the U.S. and Canada, because that $16 an hour is mostly U.S. and Canadian workers, not Mexican. However, Mexico throw another thing into the mix. They have a new president that's going to be in office on December 1st. And he is really about labor and trying to help improve training and get the lower level, poverty level or just above that communities educated and working and paying them higher labor rates. It's designed to fight the corruption that someone was asking about earlier, because a lot of the drug cartels can go in and pay people. They don't have jobs. They can't afford to survive on their own, so they go and join the drug cartels. He's hoping to really do a deep dive into those grassroots areas, those lower income areas, and help them see that they can get training, they can get jobs, and stay away from the drug cartels. We'll see if that works. He's extremely controversial also. He is a populist, very, very far left-leaning, but as he ran his campaign this year, he was much more center and talked a good game, and since he's been elected, he has continued to talk that good game. The fear from Mexicans, and I guess all of us, is that when he actually gets into office, he actually controls 2/3 of Congress as well, so he can do whatever he wants, like literally, and the fear is that he'll go back to his very, very far left-leaning ways. That has yet to be determined. We'll be keeping a close eye on that. So back on this agreement, dispute resolution was a huge issue. The U.S. wanted Chapter 19 completely out. Canada wanted it in. That was a total impasse. The U.S. capitulated and kept the dispute resolution mechanism in place for Canada, which is where you can have a bilateral. I'm drawing a blank on the name. Anyway, a bilateral group that's actually deciding laws when you have disputes and things like that. It just is deciding the resolution for those. Did great stuff on digital trade and e-commerce. So we have a very good modernized agreement, and we've got some back and forth on some of the things. I know that I need to leave time for questions, and I'm running out of time. But anyway, let me just think if there's anything I want to say that I have not. On the relationship side. So there was just a poll out today in Canada. Canadians used to like Americans, like 68% of them, 70% of them liked Americans. It's down to like 24%. And the Mexicans kind of the same way. Everyone feels bullied and beaten up, and in the end, they did what's right for their country. They tried to just come to the table, ignore the bullying, ignore the bad rhetoric, ignore the nastiness, and just make an agreement. But there's a lot of pickup to do, and back on my NAFTA point, that NAFTA is more than just a trade agreement. It became a North American family. We're partners in many, many things. Security of our continent. And something that I did not know before was that Mexico used to not give, or still doesn't, but we'll see. When the U.S. doesn't give a visa to someone because they might be on a terror watch list, Mexico would also deny that person a visa, because they never wanted those people to come into Mexico, cross the border, and commit a terrorist act on U.S. soil. That wasn't part of the NAFTA agreement. That was because they were friends. It was because we had a great working relationship, a great partnership, and a true love for one another and for our continental communities. So when you start damaging relationships, you can set yourself back a bit. Canada is the one that at 9/11 housed like 300 airplanes full of like 40,000 people or something, and one of their, I can't remember the name of Gerber or something like that. Yeah, but there's a lot of stuff going on because NAFTA led to partnerships and led to love and respect and kindness and an idea that it's North America against the world, and we cannot afford to lose that. So you've got a lot of organizations out there that are working very, very hard to repair any damage like that and fighting for North America to be the most competitive continent on Earth, especially with our energy opportunities, energy security, energy independence. I can go on and on. We do a lot of workforce training initiatives at NASCO because we want people to not lose their jobs to automation. We want them to know where they can go to get retrained to actually work the technology technology that might have made them lose their job. So there's a lot of stuff going on that's really good for our continent. What you hear on the news is not always totally accurate, but it is a good thing for the USMCA to at least been agreed to. We're going to push hard as hell to get it through our U.S. Congress. It shouldn't have an issue in Mexico or Canada. So we'll see, that's spring of 2019. And I guess on my final point, I was asked at an earlier conference with the Texas-Mexico, the Mission Food Center, about what can we do in border states to help people that are in the interior that may not understand the importance of NAFTA or how it really is, that have never been to a border town. And it's to invite, like if any of you are elected officials and have the opportunity, or companies that can do trade missions, invite a mission from another city like, in Podunk, Kansas or whatever, to come and take them to the border and show them. People are stunned that there's Spanglish at the border and you go in and out of Spanish and English just like it's nothing. And even here in Dallas that happens. So people are really stunned to understand how our families and our communities and our companies are so deeply integrated, and beyond just business, but really the families are integrated too, going back and forth. So there's so much opportunity. It's been a pessimistic time for North America, so I'm just here to say, keep the flame alive, we're gonna be okay, we're gonna get through this, and thank you for having me. Huh? Yeah, I can take a couple of questions. Any questions? Sure. You were laughing at all my jokes, so.
First of all, thank you. That was a lot of information. We're trying to absorb it. So my question is this. With the new president-elect, López Obrador, there was concern in U.S. industry about the history of Mexico nationalizing oil companies and assets of U.S. companies, which happened, long ago in the last century. And so the concern I heard from industry was, what will this new NAFTA do to protect those U.S. interests in Mexico? Thank you.
With AMLO, he goes by AMLO, Andrés Manuel López Obrador, so everyone calls him AMLO, it's easy to remember. Yeah, he's very much against the energy reforms that happened in the past presidential administration. However, his saying so far, so all we can go by is what he's saying, that he intends to honor the contracts that are already in place. He wants to look at some of the contracts that he think might not have been fully transparent to see if he can find anything wrong with them that would cause his administration to see a problem with moving forward. But as he's saying now, he wants to kind of maintain the course. But he does want to nationalize energy again. And so when he's elected, when he's in office on December 1st and controls 2/3 of the Mexican Congress, I think there's a very real fear that that could go backwards. Yes, sir.
So in the middle of all the NAFTA debate, the Panama Canal has just been widened so that ships carrying 12,000 containers can come from China as opposed to 4,000 containers. And there's been a lot of debate, probably mostly caused by the railroads that used to transport all those containers from Los Angeles to the east. Now these ships are supposedly going to be unloading in Houston and Veracruz. Have you seen a big concern about that?
To be honest with you, I have been so drowning from NAFTA and USMCA that I have not done, and I haven't updated myself on that. But what I know from before, there were varying perspectives on how the opening of the Panama Canal would affect the supply chains. So I actually don't know. I think some people are very concerned, and some seem rather nonchalant about the whole thing. And so I think that you see a lot of water ports that are dredging and getting deeper and deeper, so they can take the Panamax ships or whatever. But I don't have a recent update on how that is going at all, so I wouldn't feel comfortable answering the question. Sorry. Yes, sir.
My question is regarding the the availability of the high-skilled labor in Mexico. While so far Mexico is
more famous for abundance of low-skilled labor. The new NAFTA rule requires a certain percentage of the production to be in the factory whose wage is $16 or more. And one way to meet that requirement is increasing the on-site suppliers and increasing the high-skilled jobs in the manufacturing factory. But for that to happen, Mexico has to have a certain good number of the high-skilled labor. And how much is high-skilled labor available in Mexico right now?
Well, I mean, they have great universities there in Mexico and very, very well-educated Mexicans that are coming out of them. And they have a very young population. I think it said up there, 25 was I think the median age or the mean age. So all those people are just coming out of university, not all of them, but so they have a lot of high-skilled people there. And then I think the idea is to take some of the lower skills and help them get training that is not at the university level, but is in the competencies they need to have the skills to be able to be paid more for the work that they do. So there's efforts underway there. But when you asked that question, there was something that I was going to say about I think the idea for this was that they had to get an agreement, right? Every country agreed. An agreement, I hate to say it, but is better than not having one. And the havoc that would be wrought if that were the case. And so I think this is some place where Mexico gave a little bit, because a lot of that will benefit the U.S. and Canada more. But here's the thing that's interesting, because this has got to be an enforceable agreement, not just an agreement. And you have a lot of people that have had real trouble with the first NAFTA, and is it actually even enforceable? And when you start talking about, it's hard enough to figure out you have a part of a car that is from one place, a part of a car from another place, and you have to source and know the origin of all these different parts that go into making a car. That in and of itself is a nightmare to deal with all the tracking of that. But when you start having to add a layer of not only where did it come from and what is it and what's the content of it and is it 20% or 50%, but to know who was the worker that was working on that part and how much did they make, to be able to track that kind of information is almost impossible. And so the jury's still out on this mechanism. And again, it hasn't gone through Congress. So you may see some people, when they have time to read the text and actually think about the math of this and have industry weigh in on, whoa, we can't track who made $16 an hour and who made 12. That will kill us. Like the amount of money it would cost just to track that is worth not even being a part of NAFTA. So when you start getting the pushback now that this is actually an agreement to be debated, you may see some things changing a little bit. And it's an up or down vote for TPA authority, but it may get dicey there. And then how do you enforce it is the big question. Yes, sir. Pink shirt.
Well, I'm from Mexico, and I really enjoy your presentation. Everything that you say sounds amazing to me. I just want to point out some things, coming from the other side, and especially for every questions that are arising here in the panel. I'm just going to tell you, Mexico is ready. We are so happy that the agreement was signed, and the Mexican economy is doing so well. We are of the best 15 economies in the world. The relationship with Texas is great as we see it. And the population in Mexico is prepared. We are a lot of young people there that are really happy about this agreement. Companies are moving, and integration is key in here. So everybody that is from Texas, and Mexico and Texas is a great relationship. So let's keep going with that. Mexico is ready. In fact, we're building the second biggest airport in Mexico City because it's just so big, Mexico City. Everybody goes to Mexico City, the most visited city in South America. So what I'm saying is free trade is everything, and especially here with the relationship of Texas. So we just got to keep going,
Yep.
and enjoy that relationship and enjoy free trade.
And Mexico has, very well said. And Mexico, I think, has the most free trade agreements of any country with other countries. They've got either 46 or 48 free trade agreements. So they have really opened their markets to the world. And again, that brings me back to when you've got China investing trillions of dollars into their infrastructure, the One Belt, One Road that you might have heard about. You have India investing billions and trillions of dollars into infrastructure, and the U.S. can't really get its act together through Congress to have an infrastructure bill or corridors of national significance. We're kind of in a mess here. Other countries are trying very hard to pass us by and will do so, which is all the more reason for us to band together as a continent and capitalize on our relative strengths and weaknesses against the rest of the world. So, yes, sir.
Can you expand a little bit more on the supply chain side? Seems to me that that's sort of the basis for making all this work. And can you expand a little bit in terms of what's happening in Mexico with respect to the supply chain, the rail system, for example, the infrastructure?
Yeah, so you've had lots of investment in Mexico in the rail. You've had new corridors built. You've had new toll roads built. You've had bridges. They have the highest suspension bridge, the Balearte Bridge, that goes over major mountain regions that connects Topolobampo to, well, several different, I mean, there are forks, what is it called? I don't know. Just several different border crossings on the Arizona and Texas border. So they've invested tons of money into improving their infrastructure. Canada has done the same. They have the Asia Pacific Gateway that's working. It's really designed to be with China, but it's coming across. You know, the population of Canada is very spread out right along the U.S. border. Like most of the population of Canada is within 200 miles of the United States border. It gets very sparse up there in the tundra. So the east-west corridors are of major importance to Canada. They're investing in the Gordie Howe Bridge, which is at the Detroit-Windsor border crossing. You have the Ambassador Bridge there, largest border crossing on the northern border, but they're going to have another bridge now. So there's infrastructure enhancements all over the place, and more on the supply chain is customs and trade facilitation, a lot of the technologies we can use, the single window initiative, which I could explain. I don't know if, I mean, it's like just very briefly, our country, the U.S., has 48 different federal agencies that are involved in clearing a good across an international border. I think Mexico has about 20, and Canada, I think, has 12. But those entities have never been linked with technology. And so you have a massive customer service problem, massive congestion at the borders of the goods that are being misplaced, or the paperwork's not right, and they get hung up and no one knows. And so they're working on single windows of all three countries, and then ultimately to integrate our three countries so that you go to one place as an importer or an exporter, you file your documentation, the 48 agencies get it through email. They get the information they need and require. They have a time frame within which they've got to get back to let you know what's happening with your good, if it's going to be hung up at the border, if you need to correct an error. So there's all sorts of really cool things that are going on that aren't necessarily in the scope of a free trade agreement, but would help to have them modernized in one. And that stuff has happened. And so there's a big commitment to single windows and improving our supply chains, connecting our supply chains, making them more secure and more efficient. And you see that in the USMCA. Yeah. Yes, sir. Okay.
On the issue of changes in the disputes of which I gather some of them are industry specific, so they have to be national courts with some industries, and they can be bilateral with others.
Yep, I do not know. I have not had a chance. The text was just published at like 11 p.m. on Sunday, and I'm just back from Vancouver, and I have not had a chance to dive into that. So that is not something that I can answer right now. I don't know what the new agreement says about that stuff. I just know that Chapter 19, which was to keep the binational like advisory boards that could settle disputes between countries, was a huge problem, and it was kept in because Canada demanded it be, and the U.S. capitulated. So that is good for dispute resolution to not have it be all U.S. law that decides our North American disputes. It's the best I can do right now, sorry. Yes, sir.
The competitiveness of the USMCA agreement, who's going to be tracking that under this new agreement?
They have a competitiveness council. I mean, I think it's up to industry and everyone using the USMCA to track it. I don't know that they're going to have some kind of federal administration that is going to track the success of it, but they have a council they are forming, which will involve industry stakeholders and I think some regional government, local governments, to help keep in constant communication with the federal administrations of all three countries to say this needs to be tweaked. Or like, so that 6-year review, the reason why they've done the 6-year review and this new council is to make sure that we never again have an issue like we did with NAFTA, where it's gone 24 years and has never been updated, because technology changes so much and things change so much that you've got to keep your finger on it. And so they did create a council to help advise the government and to make suggestions for tweaking at each 6-year review period, and that should be a big help. But ultimately, it's going to be up to the companies that are benefiting from it to keep track and to send them a good positive message, to let your workers know that your job depends on trade with U.S., Mexico, and Canada. So many companies, the people that work there don't understand, don't know that as much as just putting it in a monthly newsletter. Someone suggested on paychecks, but everyone gets direct deposit these days. But be able to say, 35% of your paycheck is because our company does business with Mexico or Canada. So industry is going to have to come up with innovative ways to convey that message to the voters, to keep them informed. But that's going to be on a case-by-case basis, I think. Okay, I'm going to go. All right, thank you guys.